all lumped together in this sense of a criminal mass that is absolutely bent on doing something wrong, whether it's filling the bin with the wrong stuff, growing a hedge too high, or doing something slightly worse. But what I object to is the sense that we have all been reduced in this way, reduced to a possible malcontent, a possible criminal. If you want an example of how the government has completely lost its sense of the innocent citizen, look at the DNA database, on which there are now 1 million innocent people whose genetic profiles are carried there, and were actually, until people started complaining, an organisation called GeneWatch, were actually subject to rather suspicious research. 1 million people are still on that database, some 14 months after the European Court of Human Rights ruled unanimously against this as being an invasion of people's rights. I think that is one of the crucial issues in the next election. I don't think it'll be made very sharply, but I do believe that we have to understand the sort of process that is going on here, and it does include powers of entry, which have accumulated over the last 13 years, willy-nilly, with the government just regarding our space as their entitlement. I was put onto this idea of the ownership of space by thinking the other day in the bath about the GDR, which I researched at length for a book about 8 years ago. And I spent a lot of time in the East. One of the fascinating things was with the GDRs, they didn't often really know what they wanted to watch. There were 82,000 Stasi officers, and they often didn't really have much of an idea what they wanted to watch. The Germans had a miserable life, and they had a miserable diet also, which meant that many of them were dedicated gardeners. They had allotments like we do. And if you went to the East, moving care had been focused on these allotments. The Stasi could not bear the idea of people going there on that Saturday afternoon without cameras around the place, without knowing what was going on. And so what they did was to design a water can which had a camera and a microphone. Ditto what about old, I suppose we'd call them trubs, but gardening baskets you use in England, were all fitted up and left in different spots around these gardens, just to pick up anything they thought might be useful. Actually, I think it was really because they wanted to have control and dominate a particular space, which is, I think, the second part of the story I want to tell, is that, I don't know if you've noticed, but I think there has been a transfer of the idea of our public space, which doesn't belong to anyone, but everyone can go into it, to something which is much more supervised, a state space. And I think we're moving into that direction where public space has become a sort of owned property, defined and watched and patrolled by the state, or the local authority, but officials of some sort. I think it's a very, very regrettable development. And the second part of that, I think, is you've got 60,000 cameras per decade in the public space. I think what has happened, how I'd seek to analyse the developments that Harry and Alex have been talking about, is that there is a sense of entitlement that you can move from the public space to a private space, which was for me symbolised very close to my home in Moscow, Rome, where there's a camera erected on the outside of my gym, which I thought, good Lord, there's poor people in the first floor bedroom. And indeed, a woman found that every time she went to bed in the summer, a camera, the little black orb, was moving onto her bedroom. And in fact, the camera's now being removed after a complaint. That seemed to me to symbolise something which I think is important, is that the state authorities feel that they can move into your home on, we've heard, thousands of pretexts. 20,000 people may be able to do this without a warrant. But it's a very important idea that we have to re-establish the privacy, the inviolate space that we call our home. I think the movement of the Labour Party has been one of it's like chaotic, bossy intrusiveness. If you look at the way they're now moving to the private sphere, telling people they're too fat, offering advice about how to bring up children. Because I don't know if you saw a charming little girl on the front of the Daily Telegraph the other day, in red Wellington boots, looking bright and perky as any 6-year-old does. And she, fit, loved running, loved art, loved everything, was defined by some ludicrous local official as being obese. This kind of thing is absolutely unconscionable and unacceptable in a society which calls itself free. I have a very strong view that the state has moved into these spaces, our private space, public space, and our personal sphere, because this hasn't been a very competent government. If you look at its activities on climate change, if you look at its activity on the ageing population, on the development of gangs, the unemployment amongst graduates, which I'm very conscious of because my kid is now looking for a job as a graduate. If you look at these things, they just have not achieved anything. So what I think is being done is a kind of displacement activity, where they've concentrated on these, I think, more or less frivolous issues of control and bossiness, instead of actually governing. I don't end with any particular joke or anything. David's back, the white rabbit. I'm not going to end with any joke or with any particular fact or theory, but I do think that I'm very pleased to hear that the Conservative Party is considering a repeal bill, and I hope you make much of it in the election. But I do think, having watched this now for 5 years and let it completely dominate my life, that we are at a very important stage, and that this election, if we, as it were, the opposition parties lose this election, if the Labour Party manages to cling on to power, our free society will be in serious jeopardy. And that is, I think, the only conclusion after the last 5 years that I've reached, that this society really does need to establish its rights against the state and against petty-minded officials. Thank you very much.